So welcome everybody. My name is Jane Eliasof, for those of you who don't know me yet, and welcome to our History at Home series. I'm excited to complete our survey of Montclair architecture that we started last week. Welcome back to those of you who were here for last week, and for those of you who weren't, you can look it on, see the recording on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. Just go to our website, montclairhistory.org, and there's a link right to it, and then you can learn everything you wanted to learn about Gothics and Queen Anne's and other things like that. Thank you to everyone who has supported us and the wonderful sweet notes we've been getting from you all. And if you would like to support us during this time, you may. You can do it now. We have 4 ways you can do it. You can send us a check the old-fashioned way to 108 Orange Road, Montclair, New Jersey, 07042. You can go on our website. We've got a join or donate button. We do love new members. So if you do go on there, there's a little place where you could say why you're doing it. And if you want to mention that you're enjoying the virtual programming, that would be great. We also have got Zelle, which is the banking one, and we've got Venmo. So just search Montclair History Center and you'll find us on those 2 things as well. But even if you're not, we love having you with us. It has been just a wonderful time sharing these evenings with you. And we've learned a lot. We've had a lot of fun. And in a way, you've been a lifeline to us. We've been able to carry out our mission through these programs. And so we're really delighted with that. I'd like to introduce Helen Fallon, for those of you who don't know her. Helen is the vice president of our board of trustees, and she is my partner in crime with this program. And so I am going to begin to share while Helen can go ahead and start talking to folks.
Thanks, Jane. We're presenting this overview of Montclair's residential architectural styles pretty much as they appeared chronologically, but buckle up because we're going to move pretty quickly from Colonial Revival to Contemporary. Although our focus today is architectural design, remember that the historical event that most profoundly spurred residential development in Montclair in the late 1800s to early 1900s was the arrival of train service that made daily commuting from Montclair to New York City viable. Montclair became a streetcar or railroad suburb. New Yorkers and others had long admired the beauty of our location on the eastern slope of First Mountain, but when those trains came through, people moved here to Montclair from the city in droves, and we began to transform into the half-country, half-city suburb you would recognize today. Jane and I will continue our very thorough book report on a field guide to American houses by Virginia Savage McAllister. We mentioned during part 1 that this was our Bible, supplemented by conversations with actual architects and design professionals, as well as other source materials like the Preservation Montclair Historic Inventory that was completed in the early 1980s. We also want to remind you, defining architectural styles is not always an exact science. Architects and academic sources do not always concur. Also, we have plenty of the Montclair mishmash, in which design elements from different architectural styles are very blatantly combined, because that's what the client or the architect or the builder thought looked nice, or because the styles are similar and the elements work well together, like granimals. Our intent is to give you a sense of the major styles we see in town and some of the defining shapes or details of each. Last time we saw plenty of side gable roof shapes, front gable, centered gable, cross gable, and my favorite, clipped gable, also called jerkin head if you really want to be obscure about it. The clipped gable is the one that looks like it's been squished back at the peak. We'll see those again, but we're also going to see more hipped roof and more gambrel roof and the nested gable. And also note the pyramidal roof, which comes up today and never quite as pointy as the one on our chart here, but it is similar to the hipped, but the roof continues upward to a point. We're even going to see a salt box and some flat roof examples. Now, okay, go ahead. Jane's going to go over these glossary terms.
Right. So before I dig in, I just want to go over a couple of the ones that you're going to hear me say a lot today, or Helen say a lot today. And if you were here last week, you'll recognize most of them, but we just want to sort of level set everyone. So this is a dormer. It's the little window that breaks up a roof line. This is a pediment. It's that triangle above a door or a window. The lights is what they call the windows around the door. The one above it is called a fan light for obvious reasons, and the ones on either side are called side lights. An eave is the part of the building that is right below the roof line. And sometimes you have open eaves where you can look right up there and see the rafters. And sometimes you have boxed or closed eaves. And we will be talking about them later on. They're very indicative of different styles. These little jobbers on there are called brackets. And then when you see a row of arches like this, it's called an arcade. So this is what we talked about last week. And again, check it out on YouTube if you missed it. The ones that are highlighted in blue are the ones that all took place before 1940 and were popular. First, the Dutch and English vernacular, the federal, very few actual federal homes here in Montclair, and then the Greek Revival house. But then all of the ones in yellow are sort of referred and lumped together as Victorian, because they all took place during the reign of Queen Victoria. But as I said last week, that's like calling a dog as opposed to saying it's a German Shepherd or a poodle. And so when you really want to dig into architecture, you got to look at the dogs as poodles and German Shepherds instead. Today, we're going to look at these styles. We're going to look at ones that were popular from 1880 to 1940. That included the Colonial Revival, the Neoclassical, the Tudor Revival, Italian Renaissance Revival, Mission Revival, and then a couple of modern ones, including the Prairie and the Craftsman. Then we'll also look at some post-1940 moderns, which are ones that you'll recognize very easily, the Ranch, the Bi-Level, and the Split. And then Helen's going to talk a little bit about some of the really cool contemporaries that we have in town as well. We're going to begin with the Colonial Revival. And interestingly, the Colonial Revival dates back to the period when the Philadelphia exhibition was being held in 1876, which was the centennial celebration. And really, Colonial Revival, and I know this is going to sound pretty obvious, is about like the revival of anything that was colonial. So you see a host of different types of colonials around. Which is not surprising because its popularity really has extended 14 decades. A field guide says it ended in 1955, but you and I all know that if we drive around town or in some places that are a little less developed than Montclair, you're going to see colonial revivals being built. So the front doors are usually accentuate. Oh, and then also forgot about this. Those of you who joined us last week will remember that we will put a great example up of a style and then show you some of the ones in Montclair. This one does happen to come from Montclair. This is the Anchorage, located on the corner of Wildwood and Park, built in 1930 by Francis A. Nelson. And we do have another YouTube program on just Francis A. Nelson's work. So the front doors usually have that pediment that I talked about. This is not a triangle. It's called a broken pediment. The windows are usually multi-paned. This would be called 6/6. The one right to the right of it would be an 8/9. 12 on that one. So you've got different styles of panes. You have a one-story wing, very common. The dormers up on top. And also, let me just go back one more thing. And also, they are usually very symmetrical. Now, in the earlier periods, 1880 to about 1910, 1915, the people were actually nodding to the colonial ancestors. They weren't really trying to follow it to a T. As you get later on in this period, you see more and more stricter adherence to the Colonial Revival style. Here is a lovely one on Plymouth Street. Now, notice it is a little bit earlier. It's 1910. And notice it's not quite symmetrical. On the one side, you have the double windows on the left side. And on the right side, those two windows are split apart. And I can tell you that no self-respecting wealthy colonist would have had an asymmetrical house or one with a two-story wing on the side. So that's how you can tell this one's a little bit earlier. About 25% of Colonial Revival houses are two-story rectangular boxes like this one. They're actually even called classic boxes sometimes. But you can see the pediments up on the dormer up there. And it's got this beautiful window that's called a Palladian window. And it's symmetrical. And this one has a front porch, which was a fairly common thing in Colonial Revival homes. This one also has a front porch. This is on Willowdale, and there's that salt box roof that Helen was talking about. It was a common style during the colonial period, especially in New England. Now, what's interesting is I mentioned symmetry, and this one is not symmetrical, but they sort of gave you a buy if you had a front porch, because you didn't always have to have your door in the middle if the front porch covered the entire first floor. Some of them didn't have porches at all, or in the case of this house, it had a porch that served more as an entryway than an actual rock on it porch. This one on Upper Mountain is a little less boxy because it's got that great undulating second floor. And then look at this one on Upper Mountain. It's decked out even when it doesn't have Christmas ornaments up there. It has an accentuated front door with that great porch. It has one-story wings on either side. It has dormers with pediments and such a pretty fan light up there in that front gable. Here's one on North Mountain, opposite the south end of Anderson Park. It was built sometime between 1906 and 1933. I haven't been able to finalize that. You can see that the door is accentuated. It has side lights, and it's definitely symmetrical. But notice those dormers. They're a little bit different. They're called eyebrow windows. They're usually not operable, but mainly are there to allow light come in. And they also add kind of a nice curvy relief to a very boxy style. So this Colonial Revival on Prospect, when I saw it, I thought, gosh, that looks oversized. The symmetry just isn't there. But then when I looked closer, I realized that if you knocked off that left wing and you added a couple of pediments to the top of it, it looks much more like a traditional colonial. Now, a little bit more modern, we get this one, which was built in, more modern, built in 1924 on Warfield. Notice the symmetry and the pretty fan lights and side lights. And then this one built in the 40s on Stonehenge. And what's interesting about this is now the car has become so ubiquitous that they're building the garage right into the house as opposed to situating it on the back of the property. And then there's this one. Look at that pediment. Isn't that great? Well, it's very traditional. Those big windows on the front probably were not. They may have been more traditional windows that have been replaced. Now, we look at this and we say Cape Cod. They call it, the field guide calls it, a one-story subtype of the Colonial Revival genre. It loosely patterns the wooden houses in eastern Massachusetts that were built during the colonial period. Most often they have dormers and an accentuated front door like this one. And this one even has that transom window above it. And then I think this one is adorable. This stone facade to me really makes this house. Now, every one of the Colonial Revival houses I showed you had side gables to them, and that's because they harken back to the English early colonial styles. But Helen is going to talk to you more about the Dutch colonial styles that have gambrel roofs instead.
A small percentage of colonial revivals have gambrel roofs. This is the roof that doesn't come straight down, but has a few distinct slight angles, a shallower slope above a steeper slope. Sometimes you see cross gables, like on this home, which the original Dutch colonials would never have had. And here's a prominent front-facing gambrel, which was more common in the earliest Dutch colonial revival examples, this one on Elm Street. And it looks like the two floors, they could actually fit two floors in that very steep roof. A narrow front-facing gambrel roof was popular on more narrow streetcar suburb lots. These are on Claremont Avenue near Greenwood, within easy walking distance of the Walnut Street station. Some of the original porches have probably been enclosed, but you can envision that they were originally constructed as open porches, more like you see in the middle, the second floor of the original one, or the second floor of the middle house. Here's a side-facing gambrel, and we've got plenty of those in Montclair. They may have separate dormer windows or a continuous shed dormer with several windows like this one on Mountain Terrace. This larger home on Park Street has the gambrel roof and also more of the traditional colonial revival features like symmetry and an accentuated front door. It also has separate dormers rather than a continuous shed dormer. Dormers of any kind are a big departure from the original Dutch colonial style, though. And I hate to break it to you people, but if you live in one of these built early to mid 1920s, and many of us do, including me, although this is not my house, we were told it was a Dutch colonial revival, but maybe not. As was recently pointed out to me, it's actually a pretty straightforward colonial revival. The main roof form is actually just a side gable with some gambrel embellishment. The gambrel doesn't define the slope of the interior up in the attic like it would if it was a true gambrel roof form. But so here's a great example of credible architectural sources not agreeing on style. Because while that explanation I recently received from a well-educated design professional makes sense to me, I've also seen this exact roof form in the historic inventory of Montclair, where it's called a Dutch colonial, not merely colonial revival. So take your pick on that one. I'm going to keep calling mine Dutch colonial. Let's finish up with this very elegant Dutch colonial, the George, built in 1902 as a home for the Van Vleck family. It was designed by Van Vleck and Goldsmith. It was converted into the Georgian Inn in 1940, and it's now a hip boutique hotel owned by Montclair's makeup maven, Bobby Brown, and her developer husband. Other than the gambrel roof, it looks very much like the colonial revivals Jane just showed you, especially the elaborate front door and the dormers with pronounced pediments. This very steep gambrel roof includes 2 stories, as you can see from the multiple dormers, one above the other. Now Jane is going to get into neoclassical design.
So whereas colonial revival can be dated back to the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philly, the neoclassical style really dates back to the World Columbian Exhibition, which was held in Chicago in 1893. It celebrated the 400th anniversary of Columbus's sailing, and it had a classical theme. And architects of the day created a temporary city with mammoth colonnaded buildings. And if you haven't done so already, I highly recommend the book Devil in the White City, which talks about the Columbian exhibition. Now, many of the smaller pavilions representing each of the states had more domestic-sized structures with these full-height porches with a roof supported by columns. The columns were either Corinthian, as you see here, or Ionic, as we'll see in the next example. But if you take away those big columns and you wind up with a pretty classic Georgian Federal or Colonial Revival home. So this one on Prospect Avenue, see the difference in the columns? That's an Ionic column. The final style is Doric, which is a much simpler style. And then this one that almost looks like a plantation on Christopher Street. And by the way, I want to shout out to the realtors who took a lot of these pictures. Right now, with all this snow, when Helen and I tried to get around and take some pictures, it was really difficult to get a good shot of them. And so we found a lot of these on the realtors' websites. Here's a really nice one on Wayside Place, very symmetrical. And then there's this one on Upper Mountain, but look at that pediment. That's really a Colonial Revival pediment. So if you are driving through Montclair and you see a house with 2 stories of columns, you know it's neoclassical. It's the one thing you should take away from tonight, if nothing else. Helen, you're up.
Okay, Tudor Revival. I think we have a few Tudor Revival dwellers in the crowd today. This style gets its name from the period of Tudor reign in England in the 16th century, but actually draws from a wider variety of architectural examples from late medieval and early Renaissance styles. And it includes everything from thatched roof cottages to grand manors. There's a huge variety in Tudor Revival design, and I think it's become my favorite to look for. This particular home on South Mountain Avenue has all the key elements, and that's why it's our great example. The most obvious distinguishing features are the steeply pitched roof and the prominent front-facing gables. It's got decorative half timbering, tall, narrow windows in a grouping. It looks like it includes a combination of casement windows, the ones you crank open, and double hung windows. It's hard to tell, but let's assume that's leaded glass, which with lead strips instead of wood strips between the small pieces that make up one window pane. Many Tudor windows also have diamond-shaped panels. Here we see massive chimneys with something called chimney pots. Early examples like this were usually very high style and symmetrical, and this one has also had a very elaborate door surround with the horizontal band of stone near the curve of the doorway arch, and then the battlement sort of castle shape above the arch. A field guide to American houses estimates that 25% of homes built during the 20s were built in Tudor style, second only to the popularity of Colonial Revival, which was the first style we reviewed today. The Tudor and Colonial Revival periods fit right into the period of Montclair's most rapid growth, so that makes sense. That's why you see them all over the place. Some Tudor Revival homes incorporate details from the American-born Craftsman style, which was happening contemporaneously, so things get a little mishmashy. And like the very asymmetrical Queen Anne's we reviewed in part 1, late Tudor Revival designs threw symmetry to the wind and just let the floor plan and the flow rule the design. In coming slides, you'll see different heights, wings, wings here and there, and other asymmetrical features. Before we discuss Tudor Revival anymore, let's look at the original Tudor from London, built in 1585. This is the Staple Inn. Note the multi-gabled roof, of course the exposed timbers. These wooden elements were actually integral to the structure. They were visible not only from the outside, but the inside of the house. They weren't just tacked on as decoration like today's decorative half timbers. But that look with the wood stripes created the brown and white motif we associate most strongly with Tudor. We also wanted to show a few commercial examples of Tudor Revival, since that style really defines the Upper Montclair business district in particular. There are a few gems in Watchung Plaza too. Even this quite recent renovation in Upper Montclair was done in a new interpretation of Tudor Revival. The field guide would classify this newer interpretation of an older revival style, a revival of a revival, as neo-eclectic. Let's get back to the residential architecture with another striking South Mountain Avenue home. See the half timber boards interspersed with stucco. In addition to the rounded doorway, which is common in Tudor Revival, in this one, you see another front door design feature, small tabs of cut stone that project into the surrounding brickwork or stonework. Early elaborate examples like this were called stockbroker Tudor, and it's said that the extent of the decorative half timbering was a reflection of the wealth of the person who built the home. This beauty also has the prominent front-facing gables, groupings of windows, and massive chimneys with chimney pots. We certainly have many grand examples of this style, but we also see in Montclair plenty of more simplified, modest, and diverse Tudors, which became more popular after the Great Depression. And here's a quick story. For a few years, I narrated the third grade Montclair history bus tour for a Bradford elementary school teacher and her class. And we drove all over town, and there was so much history that we covered for the kids, but I wanted them to take away one little architectural tidbit. And so I explained to them that the half timbers, those strips of wood on the outside that were the most obvious thing I could point out to them, usually tell us it's a Tudor Revival, and we spied them all over town. Even the bus driver started yelling back to me, "Tudor, coming up on the left." Sometimes timbers are gray, like this one. This home also has an asymmetrical front-facing gable. And note how the windows in a Tudor Revival fit in between the lines of the timbers. They never interrupt or chop into them. This home also has some Craftsman style brackets. Here's the Montclair History Center's own Schultz House at the corner of Claremont and North Mountain Avenue. It was designed by noted architect Michel Lebrun for Charles Schultz, not the Peanuts guy. It was constructed in 1896 in Tudor Revival style, including most notably the steep pitched roof, dominant symmetrical front gables, and decorative half timbering. It's really so pretty. Mindy, your house is Tudor Revival. In fact, it's a subtype categorized as single dominant mid-facade gable, which translates to a large full facade, steep front-facing gable, and yours has a prominent chimney, two gables called a nested gable, and a swooping roof line. If you had an arched front door, it would have been a slam dunk, but you get extra credit for the roof line that swoops over your driveway in a sort of porte cochere. There's no decorative timbering on this stucco, but it's still Tudor Revival. I love this one. It might even be called a Tudor Cottage. In addition to the decorative timbers, it's got the very prominent front-facing gable that encompasses arched doorway entrances on the left and right. I actually drove around the block like 4 times in order to find this house again and to take a picture of it. The next one is, we wanted to make sure we included one Tudor Revival with the false thatched roof. It's another recognized subtype of Tudor Revival. They are inspired, as you might have guessed, by English cottages. Now let's look at the other extreme, and we'll finish up Tudor Revival with a bang with some very stately English manor examples. Kabul Court, built in 1932, is quite fancy, and we're highlighting the parapet above the two-story bay window. Another English manor house, we especially like that the decorative timbers are in a different decorative shape, not just vertical stripes. Now, Jane, take us through Italian Renaissance Revival.
Okay, so this little summer cottage is the Breakers in Newport. You may recognize it, and it's our great example. Whereas Tudor Revival, Neoclassical, and Colonial all drew from Anglo ancestors, the next two styles actually don't. And the Italian Renaissance style, Revival style, was first popularized on the East Coast by McKim, Mead, and White as early as the 1980s, or 1880s, but it really began to come into being around the 1890s. They were mostly upscale mansions and public buildings, but some of the hallmarks are that it's masonry. It's not made out of wood. You have this low pitched roof. You have a recessed entranceway, and you often have pilasters, which are these columns that look like they're pasted onto a building. The windows are usually full length, often have those arches on top. The top floor usually has smaller windows, probably helping to create a vertical image, and then has these wide eaves that are boxed but have decorative brackets underneath it. So now let's see how that translates to Montclair. Here we have one on Upper Mountain Avenue. This is probably one of our best examples of it. After World War I, builders became far more adept at putting masonry, a veneer on buildings. And so this became a much more common technique for domestic architecture through to about the 1930s. This Italian Renaissance kind of fits the mold. It has the low-hipped roof. It has the recessed entrance. It has the full-length windows. It has the little small windows up on top, and obviously it's masonry. This pretty one on Afterglow Way almost looks like, to me, the top colonnade should be flipped with the front door instead. But I wanted to show you this historic picture because when you see that, you really begin to understand the Italianness of this building. Certainly looks like it belongs in Tuscany. This one on Wayside is on the National Register. It was built in 1930 by Arthur E. Ramshurst. The National Register claims it's Spanish Revival, and it kind of has some mission overtones to it, as Helen will show you. But I think there are shades of Italian Renaissance with that covered arched patio area and the hipped roof. And we're going to end the Italian Renaissance Revival with the Mini Lucy building, which is currently the Montclair Neighborhood Development Building. It's in the heart of Montclair's, or what was Montclair's Italian section, and it was built at the tail end of this style in 1930. But look at that really beautiful arcade. So this is from Italy. We're going to say ciao, and we're going to move on to Helen, who's going to talk about Mission.
Okay. Mission style began in California, which is where our great example is located. Missions were established in the late 18th century as part of Spain's effort to convert Native Americans to Catholicism and to further Spain's efforts to colonize and occupy the land before rival countries like Great Britain could. Fast forward 100 years or so, and you saw homes like this popping up in the Southwest, drawing upon those historic religious mission structures. Mission was as popular in the Southwest as Colonial Revival was in the Northeast. Instead of drawing from the Yankees' colonial past, California and other Southwestern architects turned to the Hispanic heritage for inspiration. Like Tudor Revival, Mission designs also borrowed from the American-bred Craftsman architectural style, which was popular at this time. Mission style quickly faded after World War I, but while it lasted, its signature design elements included stucco wall surfaces, curvilinear parapet walls at roof lines and porches, red clay tile roofs, wide overhanging eaves that are open. Remember, that means you can look right up into them. A wide variety of curvy dormers and roof parapets, and prominent porches with arcaded entries. Bonus points for a quatrefoil window or a bell tower. This grand residential example has some fine Mission style elements: stucco wall finish, the telltale curved roof shapes, red clay tile roof, wide open eaves. To the left and right of the front door, we see roof parapets over those one-story projections, although I would have expected them to be a bit curvier, and the parapet detail over the front door is something different altogether, but maybe that's just a little mishmash preference of the original owner to ask for something different. Notice the bracketry under the eaves. That's getting into the craftsman details there, and I promise we'll talk about that soon. This very recognizable commercial building in Montclair Center is the Hink building, built in 1921. It's got repeating rounded bays, which create a sense of an arcade. This one also creates bell towers look above where the Claridge marquee is on the far right. And why, you ask, is the predominant architectural style at Montclair State University, California Mission? Well, I'll tell you. Edward Russ, who was the chair of the state's Board of Education and charged with getting the first campus building constructed in 1908, had traveled to California prior to the start of the project, admired the mission architecture there, and recommended it to the architect for the Montclair campus. Voila, California Mission style it is, sir. This particular picture is Chapin Hall, built in 1929. You can see the quatrefoil window in the center. There's also at least one bell tower up there at College Hall, ringing from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I can attest to that personally. Also, there are stucco walls and red clay roof tiles aplenty on campus in buildings old and new.
Whoop. In
the next few slides, I'll quickly point out some mission details rather than define the entire house as a mission style home. In this house, the pseudo arcade and rounded arches are saying mission. Notice the tile roof on this one, and also the rather mission-y curve to the front entry porch. This Myrtle Avenue home has a curvy mission-esque parapet above the porch roof, and the curvy outline is repeated above the double windows. The brackets seen under the eaves are more craftsman. Now we'll move on to the next design style, Prairie. Prairie style, like mission style, was very short-lived and went out of fashion after World War I, pretty much. The style originated in Chicago and is one of the few indigenous American architectural styles. Many people rightfully associate Frank Lloyd Wright with this style, and our great example is one of his early works. It's considered the first Prairie style home, built in 1893. The idea was for the house to have grown organically from the site instead of being plopped down like a Victorian. Notice its boxy nature, the low-pitched hip roof with wide eaves. Now these eaves are boxed in or closed. You can't look up into them like the open style we saw in Mission. Note how the horizontal appearance is emphasized by the front door surround and the white band of trim that runs between the two stories. We also learned this afternoon that Wright even used special longer and flatter bricks called Roman bricks to further emphasize a home's horizontal line. The flat flower pots, believe it or not, are also a telltale design element, and the low flat chimney emphasizes the horizontal nature of the structure. Mission, Italian Renaissance, and craftsman details pop up on Prairie homes. Here's a quick story about Wright. This Winslow house attracted a lot of attention in the neighborhood. Frank Lloyd Wright later wrote, "My next client said he did not want a house so different that he would have to go down the back way to his morning train to avoid being laughed at." Contractors and lenders were also skeptical of this newfangled look. This is probably Montclair's most recognizable Prairie home on South Mountain Avenue. It was built in 1902 for Frederick Taylor Gates, a Baptist minister from Chicago, who was an advisor to the Rockefeller Foundation. It bears a striking resemblance to the Frank Lloyd Wright great example we just showed you, which was from Chicago. And it was designed by architect George Mayer, who hailed from Chicago and was considered an important Prairie style architect. It's said that Mayer worked with Wright at some point in his career. Besides all the Chicago connections, look at this house's boxy nature, the stucco exterior, the low pitched hipped roof with wide boxed eaves, the windows, which while not a ribbon of windows, do mimic the horizontal nature of the design, and the huge door surround with many horizontal elements. And there's a band under the windows near the roof. It's even got the low flower pots in front. I think the columns and arches on the second floor are a bit atypical and lean more towards Italian Renaissance. This home on Fairfield Street was designed by architect Dudley Van Antwerp as his own home. We're going with Prairie style with mission details on this one. It's certainly boxy like a Prairie style and has the wide eaves, but it's definitely got some missiony curves and like the prominent porch and with the arcaded entry. And this mission inspired window group is also a key feature. This home on Elm Street is boxy Prairie, but with a lovely mission style curvy and arcaded front entry. Here's a lovely home on Prospect. It's boxy, stucco exterior, low pitched hip roof with wide boxed eaves, strong horizontal band at the second story. Now, what's not Prairie about it? If you said the Colonial Revival door with pediment, gold star to you. Afterglow Way. If you've never ventured up Afterglow Way, it's worth a Google and a slow drive. Very pretty homes, including this one. And I think this is the Yellow Brick Road Street, right, Jane?
That's right.
While this home is neither stucco nor brick, as the other ones we've seen, it is boxy. And it has the low-pitched hip roof with wide boxed eaves, ribbons of windows, and the massive square porch supports. Horizontal emphasis is created by the multiple roof lines, the horizontal pattern created by the wall and front porch materials. Even the flower pots are similar to the ones in the Frank Lloyd Wright Prairie house. I think Jane's gonna, do I have one left?
You have Norwood.
Okay, here's another one on Norwood in Prairie style, very similar to the others. Now Jane will talk about a subtype of Prairie.
And that's the American Foursquare. Once you recognize it, you're going to see it all over town. This great example is actually not in Montclair. It's right across the street from me in my Foursquare home in Verona. But I really couldn't ask for a more iconic example. It's got the boxy shape. It's usually 2 stories on a raised foundation. It has that low pyramidal roof, although from this angle, it's a little tough to see. It has wide eaves. It has a dormer. It has a front porch with wide steps. And my neighbor, when I said, oh, they're not as wide as I would have expected, he said, no, but I saw an old picture of it and they used to be the whole width of that space. They usually have a large picture window in front. And very often, as was the case with this house, they are different materials on the first floor and the second floor. This one has stucco on the first floor and wood shingling on the second floor. It's called a Foursquare because of the interior design. This layout, interestingly, is identical to my house, and you can see the first and second floor are divided into roughly 4 equal rooms. The floor plan without the central hall is the hallmark of the Foursquare, but you begin to see it in other style homes as well. Here's one on Montclair Avenue, very much a Foursquare, but with this fancy little window on the second floor, it adds a different look to it. This one on James Street, you can really see the Prairie influence here with those wide eaves. They almost hang over the boxy house like a brimmed hat in my mind. It's hard to tell with this picture, but this is made out of brick. And then this beautiful one that's clearly influenced by the Prairie style. It's got that horizontal emphasis that we've seen with the bands, except they've emphasized it even more with the paint colors. Nice. Notice though that it doesn't have a full porch, and the added 2-story addition with what looks like a conservatory is definitely an upgrade. And now finally Craftsman, Helen.
Okay, the Craftsman style began in California, drawing from the English arts and crafts movement and interest in the manual arts, which emphasized hand craftsmanship over machine-produced materials. Our great example is the Stickley Museum at Craftsman Farms in Parsippany, built in 1908. And if you haven't been there, it's highly recommended. What we see in this example is a low-pitched roof, wide eaves with exposed rafters, full width porch, and a heavy stone support for the porch. This home on the corner of Elston and Valley looks a lot like the great example you just saw. It's got the low pitched roof, shed dormer, deep porch, and stone base. The Elston Road house also has the signature tapered porch columns, including, or more precisely, not including, porch supports in the center of the porch near the steps, which were omitted on purpose to allow for unobstructed views from the front rooms. That was a Craftsman thing. Wildwood Avenue was a rich source of material for this program, and I must say it's worth a stroll to see the various styles on that street. What's saying craftsman to me here are the wide eaves with exposed rafters and the porch supported by tapered columns. This is the first rolled roof edge we've seen today, and those asymmetrical front-facing gables on the entry porch and the centered gable are so dramatic. And although we're not really focusing on exterior colors, this paint job really says craftsman too. It's got those dark autumn colors. Jane loves this house. Check out the craftsman brackets below the clipped front gable in the center of the roof, a jerkin head. And the bracket you can see under the eaves, you can see it on the right side anyways. There are also smaller brackets under windows and window boxes. The scalloped paneling in light blue gives this home a Swiss chalet feel. This house has a great craftsman detail. Great tapered columns made of stone supporting the porte cochere. On Lorraine Avenue, again, we see those rolled edges along the roof line. Also decorative braces under those two front-facing gables and under the entry porch roof. In brackets where the second story extends a bit further than the first floor and under the bay window. There's a few Tudory half timbers that were thrown onto the porch roof for good measure, just to keep the busybodies guessing. There are several lovely craftsman style homes in the Oakcroft neighborhood south of Anderson Park. This one is Buzz Aldrin's Boyhood home, and note the brackets. There are so many great craftsman details on this Park Street home, particularly the roof rafters under all the overhangs, even the little shed dormer in the attic. Now Jane's going to talk about a distinctive subtype of craftsman, the bungalow.
Oh, I kept winding up with the subtypes, Helen. So back in the day, when you were sitting around in the evening listening to your radio, thinking about building your new home, you'd be thumbing through a magazine like the Craftsman or Ladies' Home Journal. And Ladies' Home Journal, with its circulation of 1.6 million people, loved bungalows and probably contributed greatly to the popularity of this style. It has all of the features that Helen was just talking about in Craftsman, except it's smaller. It's usually 1 story high, and it usually has this exposed front porch that today it's often very hard to see a bungalow or to identify a bungalow right away other than its size, because people have enclosed that front porch to make some additional living space. This is one that is on Pleasant Way, and this is what I mean exactly. So if you just think back to what it might have looked like without that enclosed front porch, you may be thinking it looks like this, which is exactly what it did look like in 1980 as part of the historic inventory. And this one on Nassau Street, it has got that shed dormer that we've talked about before and a beautiful front porch. Really very pretty house that's worth driving past. Now this little bungalow, I think the jury is out on it. It does have some bungalow features to it, but it's missing that big front porch. It was originally built in 1910 on Church Street and was Dudley Van Antwerp's home and office. It was moved here in 1920 to become his home, so it's the second Dudley Van Antwerp home we've seen today. And then this pretty one, notice how craftsman-y this one is with its exposed rafters and shed dormer. And Helen, look, 2 jerkin heads in one. We can't tell if there was a porch on this and whether it's been enclosed over time, but it really is a very, very pretty house. So between 1940 and 1945, the nation was preoccupied with the war and not really focused on building new homes. But when the war ended, people began to look for new styles for new developments. And the ranch and the split level, in addition to building smaller colonials, really became all the rage. And during this period, we can see how the culture has begun to shift. People are no longer sitting on their front porches, chatting with their neighbors. They're now in their backyards having barbecues instead. And garages that were once tucked in the back of the property are now right part of the house itself. So let's begin with the ranch. We're going to use this ranch as our great example. It's 1 story with a garage or carport. It's shaped is either rectangular, a U-shaped as this one is, or L-shaped. It often has a ribbon of windows. In this one, instead, we've got two picture windows flanking the front door. Um, the interesting thing about ranches is that they were much more popular in the South and the West because there was more land and it was less expensive than it is in the Northeast. And also, it was a lot less expensive to heat a more compact house. So we do see ranches around here, but they're not as prevalent as they are in some other areas of the country. And this rectangular one is on Alexander and Park. Now, if you notice on ranch houses, you'll see that some of them have Colonial Revival details like this, like the shutters and the columns on this one. And that's because the FHA didn't like giving loans to modern houses, as just like with Frank Lloyd Wright back 50 years earlier. And so people would try and disguise these modern houses as a little bit with some of these colonial style details. And here's another one on Heller Drive. Great place to go if you're looking to see some mid-century homes. This one especially long because it's got the garage built in. And the bi-level is sort of like it's a ranch subtype, but not even Field Guide mentions it. It's got a unique style that when you walk in the front door, you actually have your choice of going upstairs or downstairs. And so you can always recognize it from the front door being sort of between two levels, if you will. Upstairs was the living quarters, downstairs was the rec room, a utilities room, and occasionally a bedroom or two. And that brings us to the original Zoom family, the Brady Bunch. They split levels were common during the post-World War II housing boom. It lasted till about 1980. It was believed that families need three separate living areas. One was the quiet living area, which included the living room and dining room and kitchen, which I find interesting because I've never found a quiet kitchen, but the noisy living area, which was downstairs in the rec room and often led to a garage, and then upstairs to a sleeping area. And looking at this house, you can kind of tell what's where the bedrooms are, where the living space is. Here's another one that has much less of a California vibe, but it's typical of what we find in this area. And notice even here, this colonial style detail, we have an eagle over the garage. This is a split level, but it's a little bit expanded with that additional front gable. And then this one is actually on South Mountain, and you may not recognize it because they did a little bit of renovation on it. And what looked like this now looks like this. And so with that, I'm going to turn it to Helen, who's going to talk about contemporary houses, which this actually fits in quite beautifully. Helen.
Okay. Well, we saw Frank Lloyd Wright's signature Prairie house design earlier in the 20th century and earlier in this presentation. His ideas about domestic architecture continued to evolve, as we see here in this great example. It's one of many Wright homes categorized as Usonian houses. Usonian is a word that was used by Wright to refer to the United States in general, and more specifically to his vision for the architecture of buildings. Wright's Usonian houses strongly influenced contemporary residential design. This great example was designed as a home in 1948, but is now owned by Oberlin College and is open to the public. Typical hallmarks of the Usonian style are a very linear appearance, a flat roof with cantilevered carport, simple built-in furniture, tall glass windows and doors that open to the landscape and maximize views to the outside. I can easily imagine this house on Highland Avenue, can't you? With contemporary architecture like this, houses could be built on steep hillsides and adapt to challenging sites, say on the eastern slope of First Mountain, which is exactly where Montclair sits. And several 1930s inventions made this type of design more possible, including thick plate glass that allowed for literally walls of windows, a feature that is so integral to this style of home to let the nature in. The examples we're going to show are all on Highland Avenue, or as we called it when my kids were little, the steep driveway street. This first example is the most traditional contemporary that we're showing tonight, in that it has some traditional looking windows and gables on the street facing facade. And the next one does a great job of blending in with nature, given its color and its siting on the hill. For many of these homes, it must be like living in a tree house. It's not even easy to get a good picture of these homes, short of blatantly trespassing and climbing through the woods. But what we can see is a very linear focus. We even have a low profile chimney on this one and a carport. I can only imagine that this and others in the show we are showing have a wall of windows on their east facing side and some pretty kick-ass Manhattan views. And look at this one, so linear. It's got a combination of the flat roof with a slanted roof with light coming in through a ribbon of windows right under those slanted roofs. Note the large expanse of wall surface on the street facing facade for privacy. Now let's turn uphill to the uphill side through the trees, and we see another strongly horizontal looking structure with a window wall, check, exposed beams beneath the deck, check, uninterrupted wall surface and screening at the entry level, check. Awesome view, well, I certainly hope so. If I got an invitation, I'd love to hike up all these steps to get to this tree house. From this angle, it doesn't even look like there's glass under that roof peak. This house is certainly nestled into its natural surroundings, and I'm sure it's really something. Well, we're going to end it here and conclude that with this conclusion that we want to remind you that Montclair has a rich inventory of residential architectural styles, and hopefully we've demonstrated that. We have structures dating to the 1700s, mill worker homes from the 1800s, farmhouses, estates of the Gilded Age, then the building boom years of the early 20th century, and more recent contemporary additions. We hope you will go forth and have a good time looking around Montclair for interesting homes with distinctive and diverse architectural details. Every neighborhood's got them, go find them.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, I'm going to stop my share and we can open up for some questions if anybody has them. You can either unmute yourself or you can just put it in the chat room, whichever you're more comfortable with.
We did have one question in the chat. A very clever lady by Claire Benz was remembering that Joe Biden's childhood home in Scranton was probably a 4-square. I don't know if either one of you know off the top of your head.
I don't remember seeing that his house.
But it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all because 4 squares are pretty ubiquitous. They're all over the place. Some, especially in like my street was pretty much developed between 1910 and 1930. And when I walk up and down my street, there are easily, it's a 1 block long street and there are easily 8 or 9 4 squares on it. So would not surprise me at all, Claire. Any other questions?
Hi. Thank you for including Craftsman Farms in the Craftsman section. I encourage everyone to go out there. I've been on the board since 1989, and unfortunately we're closed right now, but any day now we'll open it up. And I just want to allude to, as is often the case with people who are fanatical about something, they find something to quibble about. And I have some colleagues who say the word craftsman home should only be used to describe the homes built by Gustav Stickley or designed by Gustav Stickley out of Craftsman, a magazine, the book Craftsman Homes. But it is the common term, sometimes also called arts and crafts homes. And sometimes called mission, but you're quite correct that mission is really more the California mission style. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Look forward to when Craftsman Farms is open again, just like our
right
houses.
Hey,
I'd like
guys,
just like our house museums.
This is Joe Biden's home in Scranton.
Jane, 4 square expert, what do you say?
Very could be. And it doesn't have the typical pyramidal or hipped roof up on top, but mine doesn't either. Mine's got a side gable instead of a front gable. But it's very possible that is a 4 square inside.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That was very interesting. We appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. That was great.
I have a question for you about windows. It's not about an exterior thing really, but I have a house that I think is it's been told to me it was a Craftsman Colonial, and it has a sun porch on the side, which a lot of Montclair houses do, and it has 8 windows that look like they're double hung. but 3 of them are not double hung. They push all the way up into the 2nd floor.
Wow.
That's cool.
I was wondering if anybody's ever had these windows. They're incredibly heavy.
Huh.
And they look like double hung, but they're I don't know what you call them. They're just big windows.
It's a single hung, I guess.
Single hung, right?
Hung, yeah, boy, they yeah.
Wow, never seen that before.
If there's anybody on who knows the answer to that, just unmute yourself and pipe up. But yeah, that's a first.
Yeah, well, if you ever want to see them, you're welcome to come and see them.
That term Craftsman Colonial is common in the real estate biz in Montclair. I think they're really more colonial with craftsman
Details.
attributes.
Yeah.
The classic craftsman, we don't have that many in Montclair, unlike some other towns. That was not, I think, a big boom period. Sort of before and after were a little more so. But the other thing that's sort of unique about craftsmen, if you look at all the homes in Gustav Stickley's Craftsman Homes books, there are so many different stylistic. They can be Italianate, they can be colonial, they can be mission. It's really more the features in the homes that they're getting away from the Victorian. They're more emphasis on internal woodwork, heavy on all wood walls inside the homes, or plate rails, or wainscoting. And there are certain attributes. The wide soffit is one, and brackets is another, but there's no one, this is the only way a craftsman home looks.
And I think in Montclair, we saw a lot of those exterior details like brackets, or, you know, and I included Buzz Aldrin's house because he's, you know, everybody knows Buzz Aldrin, or he's interesting. There actually are other homes in that Oak Croft neighborhood that have more significant craftsman details. And we didn't focus on interior features, but that would have been, you know, another way to explore the craftsman style. But given I mean, we could barely talk fast enough to get this into.
But David, it sounds to me like we could do a really cool program on the craftsman style. If you are interested in doing a craftsman program, we would love to have you do one.
Yes.
So
the Dudley Van Antwerp Self-Art Craftsman. There's a great home on Valley Road, North Valley Road, that is a Germanic craftsman. Could be straight out of Germany or Austria. I don't know what it looks like inside, but exterior, I've always loved it.
Well, maybe do we have your contact information, David? Maybe we can follow up with you and do whether it's a joint program between our two organizations or just with you.
Yeah, I'll send Jane an email.
Okay.
Thanks.
I just wanted to thank you all for educating me about the terminology with the 4/4 or the 8/8 or whatever, because I was watching Joe Biden's tour around the outside of the White House when Jill had put up all the decorations, and he said something about, oh, and then in the windows, the 8, I think there's 16/16, and I was like, oh, I understand that. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Claire. Anything else? All right, folks, then we are going to call it a night. I hope you join us in 2 weeks for the Negro Leagues baseball show. I think it's going to be a really interesting, different program for us. So I hope you join us.
And in a month, I'm doing the train stations.
Oh, boy.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.